Why, good morning, my subjects. I'm back again, and this time we're going to be discussing some Apex lore. I've created a tier list where we're going to discuss each and every character's lore on where they fit on the lore chart, and we're going to discuss the tier list and all that. So, before the video begins, I'm going to ask you all to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Make it ding a little bit so I can make sure that you're up to date with every video. With that being said, let's get right into it. So, before we get further into the video, allow me to explain what a tier list is. So, this tier list is divided into 6 parts: S, A, B, C, D, and F. So, S is the highest, and F, of course, is the lowest. And from this, we are going to be judging each of the Apex Legends based on their lore. And by lore, I mean how good it is, how much there is it done well, or is it done poorly? We have 18 legends to get through, so why don't we just go ahead and begin? Also, I meant to say 19, but let's begin. The first character that we have, going at the very bottom of the tier list, is... It's Valkyrie, and I will die on this hill, so let's explain it a bit before I get attacked by the comment section. So let's talk about Valkyrie's lore a little bit first. So Valkyrie's lore is that she is the daughter of a renowned mercenary known as Viper, who was a vicious and cruel person to any of his foes. One day, Viper was hired by Blisk, and he did a job that, as we know for those of us who played the Titanfall 2 campaign, didn't exactly end so well for him. Now, after his death, she blamed Blisk, the man who hired her, for his death, and began a long search hunting him down. She refurbished his Titan into a jetpack, and joined the Apex games shortly after almost killing Blisk. Now, why is it bad? Because that is almost literally all of it. Apart from this semi-love triangle thing that's going on between Loba and Bangalore and Valkyrie, this is about the extent of her character and her character's lore. There's also hints in her voice lines about her being an alcoholic, with all of her lines involving drinks of some kind. But women and alcohol are essentially the bottom line of Valkyrie's lore and personality. So, yeah, solid F tier. On the opposite end of the spectrum, let's talk about probably the best lore in all of Apex. And that would have to be Crypto, and let's again continue by discussing Crypto's lore. So, Crypto's lore is that his real name is Taejun Park, and he used to program and code for some of the cameras that follow the legends in the Apex games. Now, one day while he was meddling about in the code, he found this almost rigging algorithm that was in the files. So it would rig the game for a certain character depending on how many bets were made on them. And after that, him and his adoptive sister both went their separate ways after that evening. And the Syndicate, the organization that runs the Apex games, kidnapped Crypto's sister, blaming it on him, claiming that he murdered her. He is now in a hunt to bring down the Syndicate, and the reason this lore is so high up is because it is so well done, and it is so well executed. My only complaint is that it hasn't been brought up. It was brought up in Season 5 in the Lost Treasures event, but that was it. That's all we heard. And it is such a good lore, and it is such a waste that they are not using it. It is just, it makes me sad. It makes me cry, honestly. After Crypto, we got this character, Revenant. Now, Revenant is slightly worse than Crypto's for a completely different reason. My reason being because it's being used so poorly. Now, let's explain. Revenant's lore is that his real name is Caleb Cross. Caleb Cross was a hitman for the Syndicate in about 300 years ago. After a hit gone wrong, he was executed by one of the survivors in a vat of waste. Not wanting to lose their most valuable asset, the Syndicate turned Revenant into one of the earliest simulacrums, which is a person's conscious put into a robotic body. After a hit gone wrong on Loba Andrade's parents, his coding and his body was messed up, which allowed him to see himself for what he actually is. And in that brief moment, he felt about 300 years worth of death and pain and memories. And because of this, he is now vowed to take down Hammond Robotics and the Syndicate and anyone who dares claim allegiance to them. Becoming the most ruthless mercenary and killer in the Outlands, he joined the Apex games, or was put into them because the Syndicate wanted to do some damage control. Because of all of this, it was just quite insane how brutal. And then when Loba was added, it became even more of a twister with this hate relationship going on. But it is below Crypto because it is so poorly utilized. In season, I believe it was 6, when we put together, when Loba in lore found the source code for Revenant, which is the thing that keeps him alive and prevents him from dying, she had the chance to kill the most lethal person in the Outlands, but because of her pettiness and lack of wanting to kill her parents' killer, she kept him alive to make him suffer. He then, from that moment, stated that he would kill everyone close to Loba. And guess how long it's been since he did anything? It's been about a year and a half. Yeah, I'm going to just straight up say it. It's been about a year and a half. That was until in a recent lore comic it was revealed that Revenant was looking to take out a close friend of Loba's named Jamie, who in fact was the person who found out Revenant was in the Apex games. But knowing Respawn and how bad their writers are, this will probably take another year and a half for anything to come to fruition. I would argue that if me and my 3 friends were to get together, we could probably arguably write better lore for a single character than apparently the entire Respawn writing team can put combined. Now let's go on to my favorite character, the Toxic Trapper himself, Alexander Knox. I'm putting him in upper B tier. Let's talk why. So, my reason for this is because, well, I guess let's look into his lore. Alexander Knox, as a young child, was a very odd kid. He was quite odd. He'd do weird tests on things, and he later joined a pesticide company. While doing and working on pesticides, he realized the beauty in death, and so he began practicing it on live subjects, larger than bugs, such as small rodents. He then thought that he needed to go bigger, and then pretty much executed the entirety of his lab. With everyone dead, he faked his own death, and in order to further his testing, he joined the Apex games. Now, this would be cool into itself, but I put it in B because there's not a lot of it. The last Caustic lore we got was in season 9, when Valkyrie was added, where it was revealed his mom was dying, and he kind of showed his more human and sympathetic side, but it still doesn't feel like enough. And apart from that season, we also got some lore in season 8, where he almost went full crazy cuckoo man and gassed an entire city, which is okay, but it lasted like 2 days on Apex Twitter. And so that didn't really feel like lore. It just kind of felt like a, okay, you got that. Another thing that'd be great for his character is that Caustic is an elaborate person, so why is his backstory a evil person for evil reasons? It just doesn't make sense. In his lore, he just snapped one day, and it doesn't fit his psyche as a character, and it's very aggravating. But let's move on to the next character in the list. Next up, we have everyone's favorite shielded fortress in pretty much D tier, Gibraltar. Now, let's talk about his lore. So Gibraltar is part of a search and rescue team, and he saves people who have been caught in disasters. Now, one night when he was young, he rebelled against his father's wishes, and him and his boyfriend went on a joyride on his dad's motorcycle. After said joyride, him and his boyfriend nearly died, and his dad lost his arm saving him. This caused him to rethink his life, and he reevaluated himself as a person, turning himself into a much better person than he is today. He even got to see some of the early form of the Apex games when it was just a small arena blood sport. So he is the basic protector, and the reason he is so low and in D tiers because there's literally no lore. The most lore we've had on him is some interactions with his ex-boyfriend Nick later in their life, but other than that, we just haven't seen anything. It's really upsetting because Gibby could be an interesting character, but we don't have anything on him. We have this entire canvas that we can use, but all we get is a blank slate, and it's really aggravating. So that's why he's so low. Now, our next character, who is in upper B tier, is Bloodhound. Now, let me explain Bloodhound's lore. Bloodhound's parents were killed in a machine accident on the planet Talos, in which they were both of their parents were killed. Now, their uncle lived and took them in as a sort of Nordic-following nomadic people of Talos who rejected technology. After finding an old charge rifle, which is a gun, and hunting down a beast known as the Goliath and killing it, or so they thought, they became the Blood Hunter, or Bloodhunter. Now, the downside was the charge rifle didn't kill the Goliath and instead killed their uncle, Artur. Now, this is pretty good, decent lore anyways. It's the reason why they're a all-hail Odin-ish character when this is a very futuristic world. The problem is, that's about all the lore we've gotten. I mean, Bloodhound joined Fuse in their journey to get revenge on Maggie, which we'll talk about Maggie at the end of this next season, or discuss her lore later on. And they also joined in and had this Prowler hunt that they were doing while looking to end this Prowler's suffering, and they were then met by other Bloodhounds, but that's about it. It was quite dull. That's the reason I put it in high B tier. I mean, their lore is cool. It's a borderline being a cult fanatic almost, or a religious fanatic in this futuristic dystopia is always a stereotype or character trope that I love watching be executed. But Bloodhound just needs more lore. If they had more lore, they'd probably be mid-A or low A tier. But until then, Bloodhound's lore is... Next up, in C tier all by himself, is the Grenado Tornado, Fuse. Now, Fuse's lore is quite interesting. As a young kid, his planet Salvo has always been under someone else's boot. The IMC, the Militia, and now currently the Syndicate. Until the Syndicate came along, though, it was run by warlords. Think Mad Max, people who divvied up the territory and kind of ruled it that way. It was really interesting. Him and his best friend Maggie were good friends for many, many years, bonding over this golden grenade they found as kids. As they grew older, Fuse decided he would get into some underground fighting, and he joined in some boxing matches and underground fight clubs. And he grew a name for himself and even joined the Apex games. While this was going on, though, Maggie, who's been fighting her whole life for freedom, realized that the other warlord who ruled the planet signed a peace treaty with the Syndicate, thus taking away everything she's worked for. And now to see her best friend joining the Syndicate's games, well, she got angry. Pulled the pin on the grenade, and let's just say Fuse kind of left unarmed. Please laugh. No. Fuse, now losing an arm and now replaced with a grenade launcher, joined the Apex games after Maggie did another small terrorist attack, and he then went on a hunt to attempt to end Maggie's reign, but that didn't work too well. Now, the reason I put it in C, I love the concept of a freedom fighter who just wants to make a name for himself, and he's not too concerned with the political strife. The problem is, that's about all the lore we got. We don't know anything else about Fuse, Fuse's backstory, really. Like, what happened when he was a kid? Why did he originally want to fight the Syndicate? Was it just for freedom? And he's not involved in any other lore stories. It's just kind of that. And Maggie has just been added to the games because it turns out she didn't die, which, yeah, that frustrates me. But that adds a chance for something interesting to be added here. But we just have to see how it plays out. But until now, it's going to be in C. Taking the lead in C tier and being in high C tier, we have Horizon, everyone's favorite Scottish mother. Allow me to explain, apart from my odd statement. Horizon was from a time where her planet was in an energy crisis. Olympus was failing. So she found out that there was a rare mineral in black holes known as branthium, and she went there to collect it herself. Now, her colleague, Ashley Reed, abandoned her in this gravity well, which kind of left her in this limbo time. For her, what was about 3 to 4 hours or a few days turned out to be 84 years, technically making her the oldest normal human legend. I guess that's wrong. Never mind. But this caused her a lot of strife because her son Newton was back home and she had no idea where he was. What happened to her home? She's kind of just stranded here. Her lore is a bit better than Fuse's. She currently has a rivalry with one of the other characters named Ashe, which is, it's nice. It's some good spice, why I put it in upper C, but it's not interesting. We already have tons of hate relationships. We have the whole Caustic and Crypto, and we have Loba and Revenant, and now we have Maggie and Fuse. It's just making the whole I hate you, well, I hate you too thing just really annoying and repetitive. Like, that's the only story plot they can come up with. And that just makes it so frustrating when there could be so many more better story plots that they use, but they just decide to go with the I hate you, well, I hate you too. And it's just aggravating, which is the only reason why she's in C. If maybe she decided to come to terms with Ashe, make peace with her, I'd put this easily in upper B, but no, upper C until she gets some better lore. Next up, in the bottom of B tier herself, we have Bangalore. Now, let's talk about Bangalore's lore. Bangalore comes from a military family. About 3 generations have served in the IMC military, which was the bad guys, you could say, in Titanfall 2. Now, with her came a lot of lore, such as the fact that she had pilot training, the fact that she was really good at breaking down a G7 Scout and then rebuilding it. But the problem is, the main point of her lore is that Jackson, which is her brother who was serving on the same ship as her, disappeared after a disaster on the ship. No one had footage of this, and she is now in denial that he is dead, which kind of causes a kerfuffle, but not too big of one. It's kind of her main lore point, the fact that she's saving up money so she can look around the Outlands for her brother. In a recent lore comic, though, where she encounters Revenant, who's trying to convince her to allow him to take her to Bangalore's home planet of Gridiron, he states, "You've been around the Outlands for this long, your face is plastered practically everywhere." There's one of two things about Jackson. He's either dead or he's a vegetable. Which brings up a good point. Is Bangalore really staying in the Outlands to find Jackson anymore? Or is she just staying around so she could be with Loba, who is currently kind of almost with Valkyrie? Which is, it's so annoying. That love triangle makes me want to bash my head against a wall, because that's become the main selling point of Apex as of late. But I digress. The reason it's in C tier is because of the fact that there's so much lore potential and lore that we could get in-game about how she sees things as the IMC was told about her, but we don't get any of that, and that's just frustrating to me, because it's like Gibby. We have this blank canvas, and instead of making great art, we're just leaving it blank, which is the most annoying and probably the worst option you could choose right now. So yeah, bottom of C tier until she gets some better lore, or they drop her out of the whole Loba Valk Bangalore love triangle. Next up, we have the combat medic herself, Lifeline, who is going to be right in front of Bangalore in B tier. The reason for this is, well, let's talk about her lore. Lifeline's family is very wealthy. They were war benefactors, I guess you could say. They gave weapons to both sides of the frontier wars, both the militia and the IMC. When she learned about this, she was distraught and decided to dedicate herself to helping people. She became a combat medic, or a rescue and relief medic, and she went out throughout the Outlands where war has been struck and decided to help people. Now, this is pretty good within itself, as long as who her best friend is, who is Octane, or Octavio Silva, but that's a bit of another story for when we get there. In a few lore comics, we learn that she investigated that Octane's dad was a terrorist responsible for an attack on her family. And other than that, that's about all the lore we get. We know that she doesn't like Fuse because he's indirectly responsible for the pseudo-terrorist attack caused by Mad Maggie herself. And, well, that's kind of it. That's mainly the reason why she's in B tier. Lore potential is great, but execution is poor, which is the most likely reason why any character you may like is in B tier, because there's so much potential and it's so poorly used that I think I'm going to cry. Now let's talk about the holographic trickster himself. Up in A tier is Mirage. Now let me explain. So Mirage's backstory is that he's the son of two great scientists. His mom, who specialized in holograph technology, and his dad, who was an engineer as far as we know. He had two older brothers who enlisted in the war, and both sadly are MIA, and his dad kind of abandoned him and his mom, leaving poor little Elliot Witt and his mother, who was slowly losing her memory. As of right now, Mirage is actually an ingenious engineer and the owner of a bar. His mom has apparently been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and, well, things aren't exactly good in their family as of now. It is kind of resurfacing that Elliot's, Mirage's dad is returning to kind of reconnect with his son, and I'm all for that story. In fact, this is kind of the reason why Mirage is so high. Now, Mirage is really high also because he's kind of in every story. In every single trailer, there's always Mirage. And I'm not against it, it's just kind of sickening. Kind of like hey, he's always there, which is annoying, but you get what you get, and you can't pitch a fit. Well, that's how the old saying goes, at least. And I can't help but love Mirage's story. I kind of relate to Mirage as a character. He's witty, he's charmful, he has two brothers, and he's just trying to get by in life, making sure that everyone loves him along the way. In fact, a key part of his story is that he's always selling himself because he hopes that if everyone else can help him remember, that his mom will remember him. And it's a very sweet story, and it's very heartfelt, and I gotta put it in A. He also has some ties with crypto and all that, which is all the more fun. But what I would like to see more is a more story-driven plot of Mirage, because that is what I feel Mirage needs. Mirage could easily be S tier if he had some plot going along. Now, there's some hints that he might like Wraith. He sees Rampart as his sister, and he's running his bar, which is always awesome to see. But if we could maybe see one of two things, either a continuation of this supposed Wraith-Mirage romance, and if anyone dares tell me that it can't happen, I want you all to look at what Respawn is doing with Loba, Valkyrie, and Bangalore, and tell me they do not want to push canon relationships. Either that, or maybe some lore-driven story involving Mirage's dad. That would be absolutely awesome, and would easily bump Mirage into an S-tier character. And he also just has funny quips and voice lines. Pork chop. Next, we have the speedster himself, Octavio Silva, taking the lead in C tier. And let me explain why before anyone gets on my case. Let's talk about his backstory. Octane is one of multiple sons of the Silva Pharmaceuticals, I guess you could probably say empire. Now, they created the stim drug, which Octane uses to kind of go faster. Octane was always a daredevil, even at a young age. He rode go-karts at his cousins' and brothers' weddings and doing daring stunts. Now, all of these things, of course, did not exactly make him see eye to eye with his dad, which, as we now know, Eduardo, his father, is he's a terrorist, and that is no fun. But, family isn't always perfect. I guess his especially isn't, because his dad's a terrorist. But, anyways, moving on. He attempted to do the Gauntlet, which is in Titanfall 2, the tutorial to get your movement down. And it's actually a really cool nod to a real-life thing. In real life, the fastest campaign, or I guess of the Gauntlet, was completed using grenade jumping, using grenades to boost your speed and launch you across the map. In lore, Octane did this, and he blew up both of his legs, which is no bueno if you ask me. He got 2 prosthetic legs, and he has these things in his chest for stim. Now, these tubes in his chest help filter the stim out of his blood and helps him basically not overdose. So now he can put as much fast drug into his body as he likes, and he's also pretty quick. The reason he's in C is because, apart from being Lifeline's side character, or sidekick, he's kind of not there much. He was there in the story where Lifeline's family got attacked by terrorists, and he was kind of there in some of the comics, but they were so poorly drawn, I do not even count them in the slightest. If you saw them, you would agree. And so we're just kind of pretending those don't exist, and apart from that, he's not there. He's probably going to show up a lot more with this whole Eduardo Silva storyline, where he's actually intervening. And so, if anything comes of that, he might move up a tier or 2. Not much, granted, but he might move up a few tiers. We just have to see where he goes as a character. So let's move on to who's going to be an A tier right behind Mirage, and it's going to be Pathfinder. Now, let's get into his lore and why I put him here. So, for starters, let's talk about Pathfinder's lore. Pathfinder's lore centered around the fact that he never knew who his creators were, and later in the game it would be revealed that he was built by a team of scientists who were trying to help solve the energy crisis of Olympus by getting Pathfinder to harvest the Branthium. Now, he's in a bunch of lore stories. It's revealed that he saw Revenant murder Loba's parents. It was revealed that he was there when the planet Typhon blew up. It was revealed that he's kind of been there for a lot of big events in the Titanfall and Apex universe, which is kind of why I'm putting him here, because he's kind of been everywhere. He's a big deal because, let's just say that, because no one knows that Revenant really murdered Loba's parents except for Loba. So the fact that he knows this is already a big deal. And it was revealed that he now is one of the few people who knows that Caustic is alive, or Alexander Knox, and that he murdered everyone in Humbert Labs. So, quite literally, Pathfinder is like a central character in so many different lore stories. You can't just overlook him. He's kind of always there. So this is the main reason why I put Pathfinder in A tier. The next character we're going to introduce in C tier, right behind Octane, is Ashe. Now, let me explain a bit about Ashe's lore before we continue. So for those of you who don't know, Ashe has always been a key figure in the Apex lore, or Titanfall lore in general. She was one of the few bosses that pilot Jack Cooper had to go up against to defeat the IMC eventually. Her lore in that game was that she was a simulacrum trying to figure out how she became a simulacrum. Later, when she was added into the games, it was after we reassembled her, after Blisk tossed her into another dimension, where it was learned that she knew some codes that the Syndicate wanted. She was later found by Pathfinder in a trash can, and he picked her up and rebuilt her and assembled her, thinking that she would be his new girlfriend, which was all very sweet, except for the fact that she's a murdering demon who wants to kind of kill everybody who's against her. She is now the most egotistical character in the game, claiming that she is the most powerful because she has pilot training, even though Revenant would curb stomp her in about 5 seconds flat if he was given time, and I will die on this hill. Now, she was technically the second simulacrum ever made right after Revenant, so she is kind of a big deal. But her lore isn't really used much else. She has this kind of dual personality where it's Ashe or Ashley Reed, the scientist that was turned into Ashe, kind of fight for dominance, which could be interesting, but it does not show up nearly at all. And until next season, where we're going to get some fruition out of the lore drops that we got this season, where she picked up Crypto as an apprentice and pushed Watson off a cliff because she can do that, apparently. And she did. And it's just really interesting. She has a lot of potential, but it's not being used properly. Again, like most characters in this tier. So we really just need to see where she'll be as a character next season before I do any judging. Next up, we have the best modder in the Outlands in B tier, right behind Caustic, Rampart. Now, I actually have a good reason for this. Let's go into her lore. Ramaya Parek, or Rampart, is a modder in the Outlands, known for modifying guns and weapons and armor and such, and to making them a bit more deadly. She joined underground fights, where she became a very renowned fighter, and kind of got into some shady business. She met with a gang who was led by a figure known as Big Sister, who burnt down her original shop. Now, this wouldn't mean anything unless the man who was in charge of the Apex games, the commissioner known as Cuban Blisk, took notice of her fighting skills and even got her to join the Apex games, which is in itself a feat. She helps Mirage now run the Paradise Bar, but apart from that, there's not much else. I mean, the Big Sister storyline kind of got picked up again in this past season with her town takeover, but still, it's just lackluster. It's a good story, and it could be good. We just don't get any of it, like, at all. We haven't heard of anything about Big Sister until season 11, and it wasn't, oh no, it was season 10 actually. I take that back. Last season, and beforehand we learned about Rampart's story in season 6. So we basically waited 2 years before we knew more about Rampart's lore, which is just heartbreaking because her lore is so good and she's such a vibrant character. But like I said, most people are in the lower tiers are going to be blank canvases. So, yeah, it kind of sucks. Next, we have the most wasted potential in all the Outlands, right in the lead of F tier, Seer. Now let me explain. Seer's lore is that he was born under a cursed moon. By cursed, I mean it blew up, which is, kind of a big deal if you ask me. Now, this by itself would kind of be interesting. I'm a little foggy on the details, it's never really explained, but I believe he is born blind, and is therefore using this thing on his chest to see where people are moving, and it's a cool concept. And he eventually began watching underground fighting arenas and saw the beauty in the combat and art, and became a fighter himself, and a bit of an actor, or theatrical person, dare I say. I relate to that on a personal level. But the problem is, it's just, that's all. It's not that interesting. Or it is interesting, it's just so poorly used. He became like the champion of the rejected, and of the small and weak and timid, and those who were outcast. But it's just, it could be so well done, but they did it in such a poor manner, so it stinks. He could have great lore, but we don't know. Next, we have the most wholesome in the character in the Outlands at the top of B tier, Watson. Now, let's get into this. There's a reason why I like Watson's lore. I like the idea that she invented the ring, that her and her papa were on the Outlands by themselves, and they together created the ring and created basically what makes Apex itself. As a child, she encountered a ghost in some labs, which was later revealed to be Wraith. Now, while doing some tests because of Wraith, she got electrocuted badly and left tons of scars on her body. Now, this by itself would actually make me put Watson in low B tier, but what's so cool is that she's the only character in Apex in the roster who, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, knows Crypto's true identity, apart from Caustic, who is kind of Crypto's half-brother, and that's a story for another time. So, And she was also the only character that calmed Caustic down right when he was about to gas a city full of people, which just leaves all this great potential for Watson. It's extraordinary, and I love and can't wait to see where it goes. Because depending on how Apex turns, we could have this arc for Caustic that's going to be either a turning into the worst creature known to humanity or turning into a better person. Not perfect, because, you know, it'd be really sucky if they rewrote his entire personality, but it's just so invigorating and exciting to think about. Next, we have probably the character I hate the most, but she's going to be at the bottom of C tier, Loba Andrade. Let's go into her lore. Loba is the daughter of Marcos and something or another's Andrade. These two wealthy people of the Outlands had their wonderful child, and they thought for her birthday they should celebrate, and they went out to dinner, only to be brutally murdered by a 300-year-old assassin simulacrum known as Revenant. After that, she sought revenge and was adopted by a kind family that she rejected. And she became and slipped into the life of thievery and swiping things under people's noses. She became a really well-renowned thief and one day stole phase technology, or light bend, it's teleportation technology, that allowed her to toss a bracelet and teleport long distances. This was no short of fantastic technology and just upped her assassin game. For years and years, she didn't think about Revenant. Until the Apex games, where she learned that was where the killer of her parents was. She then sought to seek revenge by executing Revenant once and for all. She even put together the pieces of Ashe and got his source code. And this is why I hate Loba, this part right here, and why I put her so low. Any logical person would think to destroy the being in the Outlands who is responsible for, you know, the deaths of millions, probably. But instead, she thought she'd be petty, and she tossed it into a phase projector, tossing his source code, which gives him immortality, into the vastness of space forever. Now, the real part that makes me angry is the fact that she somehow beat Revenant in an old-fashioned fistfight. So, yeah, that's kind of aggravating that in a one-on-one combat scenario, Loba beats Revenant. And this is why I dislike her, because the writers have given her so much plot armor. It's frankly quite infuriating. And then she got tied up in this Loba and Valkyrie and Bangalore love triangle thing, and it just got worse. They just made her like if we were to say so, they essentially made Loba the main character of Apex, because that's what all the recent story has been tied around, or centered around. If Apex was a galaxy, or a solar system, Loba is the sun, because they're just writing characters to revolve around her, and it's annoying. If Loba wasn't so much treated like the main character, and the whole Loba Valk Bangalore arc wasn't so much treated as the main story of the game, she'd probably be high C or low B. Heck, she might have even been an A tier, but no. They decided to make her essentially the main character, and given anyone who just wants to enjoy some more fast-paced and action-like lore, a slow, simmering love triangle that not one soul, I guarantee you, likes. Except for the die-hard Loba, Valkyrie, and Bangalore fans, and those people scare me a lot. Last but not least, we have, in the middle of B tier between Caustic and Rampart, Wraith, the interdimensional skirmisher herself. Let's go into her lore. So, Wraith's lore is the fact that she's not from this world. She was from a world where the IMC defeated the militia in their war, and therefore became the ones who ruled the Outlands. She was used in testing to become a phase warrior almost, where she used phase technology on people, and it didn't work so well. She was found by the Phase Walker Wraith, who we dub as the Wraith of our universe, and was brought back to our universe, not knowing anything about it, and yeah, it scared little Natalie Paquette or Watson into thinking there were ghosts on King's Canyon. Now, her lore is pretty good overall. She has this kind of thing going with Mirage, it seems, and her lore is interesting. It has intrigue to it. What was her world more like? Can we know more about it? Does this mean there are multiverses? Yes, that's for a fact. With Shadow Revenant, yes, we now know there are multiverses. But it's an intriguing little thing that I just want to see executed a bit more. And Wraith I put in the middle because I personally feel they could include her in a few more things. Granted, we got tons of Wraith lore. She is essentially the golden girl of Apex with all the skins they give her and how many times she disconnects from lobbies. But I really want to see her lore shine. I do. But it's just a writing thing at this point. If she was used more, she'd probably be the front of B or the bottom of A. But that's all I gotta say. Well, there's the tier list. I think this is a pretty accurate one. I'm not gonna lie, I'm probably gonna redo the tier list by the end of the season, as long as someone reminds me. What are y'all's thoughts on the tier list? Do you think some characters deserve to be higher? Do you think some characters deserve to be lower? Give me your thoughts. I'm actually really curious. But until then, I wish you all a good day, my royal subjects, and I hope that you have the best time of your lives. Leave a comment below, like, subscribe even, hit the notification bell. I'm going to be working a bit more on some lore drops and lore breakdown videos. I'm looking at doing a lore breakdown on Legends, one bit at a time. So comment down your favorite character in Apex, and I think I'll do a lore review on the most liked character. But until then, keep doing what y'all are doing, my subjects. And until next time, Lord Win, out.